Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 162, and we're going to talk about democracy. I wanted to do something a little bit more lighthearted, but uh, I failed. We're going to talk about democracy instead, something extremely depressing. I do have a funny story, though. Just before I started recording, I saw this story pop up on my feed on X, and it's about a punado, a poo NATO caused by a sperm whale. The story, which was an interview on BBC radio, I guess, with a couple of pictures, was kind of amusing. If you're into the whole toilet joke thing. Anyway, so back in episode 16, I did talk about democracy a little bit in a different context. But, you know, who's going to go back and listen to that? But democracy, most people believe that it is majority rules, that everyone votes, and whatever the majority, even if it's a majority by one vote, they get to decide what is going to happen next. And everyone, even the people who wanted something different, has to oblige and go along with whatever the majority, even if it's a slim majority, has decided to do. There are no other options. So if you are a contrarian, such as myself, individual, then you always lose in this kind of majority rules environment. However, democracy does not mean majority rules. That's not, so we vote. And so whatever the majority decides that we're going to do, that's what we're going to do. That's what most, as I said, that's what most people think it is. But what democracy that everyone keeps talking about is not that. And to sort of give my argument a little bit more foundation, let's go to the Communist Manifesto. And I've mentioned this bit before, but at the end of chapter 2, he lists 10 things that must happen once the proletariat comes to power, right? The working class. Once they achieve dominance and power, there are 10 things that need to happen. But right before that, like 2 or 3 paragraphs before, he goes into democracy. And this is, I'll read from it. We have seen above that the first step in the revolution by the working class is to raise the proletariat to the position of ruling class, to establish democracy. The proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest by degrees all capital from the bourgeoisie, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state, i.e., of the proletariat organized as the ruling class, and to increase the total of productive forces as rapidly as possible. Of course, in the beginning, this cannot be effected except by means of despotic inroads on the rights of property, etc. Okay, so what are we seeing here? Democracy is not ruled by the people, where every so often we get to see if the majority has changed in their opinion. No, it's ruled by the underclass, who establish themselves as the new ruling class. That is democracy, right? So there is only one political class, and that would be the working class, or so they say, because by the time you get to the end of chapter 2, you forget what Marx said in the beginning of chapter 2, where he says this, and this is chapter 2 begins by saying that communists and proletariats are exactly the same, right? And so this is the Communist Manifesto. And so he's talking about the working class. Okay, wait, I thought that was what communists were. And he says, no. Communists are different from the working class. Aha. And so after he says that communists and the working class, the proletariat, are exactly the same, he says the communists are distinguished from the other working class parties by this only, right? This only one thing. And then he lists 2 things, right? So he's a horrible writer. His logic is terrible, but I digress. So The work is so the communists are distinguished from other working class parties by only this, which are two things. In the national struggles of the proletarians of the different countries, they point out and bring to the front of the common interests of the entire proletariat, independently of all nationality. Number two, in the various stages of development which the struggle of the working class against the bourgeoisie has to pass through, they always and everywhere represent the interests of the movement as a whole. And then he summarizes. The communists, therefore, are on the one hand practically the most advanced and resolute section of the working class parties of every country, that section which pushes forward all others. On the other hand, theoretically, they have over the great mass of the proletariat the advantage of clearly understanding the line of march, the conditions, and the ultimate general results of the proletarian movement. End quote. So what's he saying there? He's saying that communists are the government. Okay. So once the proletarians have overthrown whatever system is in place, they rise to power and the communists govern everybody, right? Because they are the most superior of all of the working class, right? Superior in knowledge, superior in vision, superior in understanding, transcendence, you name it. They are the best. And so basically, the communist never works. They're the political class. And if you look at all of the democracies of the world, sometimes they tell you exactly what they're up to. And, you know, that expression lost in translation is never more apparent here. So East Germany, which no longer exists, okay, because it became part of West Germany. See, in English, we just say East and West Germany. Even in Korean, they say East and West Germany. But in German, East Germans did not call themselves East Germans. They called themselves the DDR, the Deutsche Demokratische Republik, the German Democratic Republic, which is kind of amusing. Then there's North Korea, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And just so you know, South Korea is just simply the Republic of Korea, right? ROK, right? So even in Korean, they say Bukhan, Namhan, right? North Korea, South Korea. Then there's North Vietnam, the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, right? So these are democracies. What do you know about these democracies? There's only one party. Even in communist China, there's only one party, all right? The Communist Party of China. So the United States is supposed to be a republic, right? But the Constitution never mentions the word democracy. But now that's all anyone ever says. And arguably, the United States is more of a democracy than any of these other countries. So democracy, we have to keep in mind, even if you go back to the other meaning of majority rules, democracy doesn't really determine right or wrong, what's moral or immoral. All it is just simply the majority opinion at any given moment, right? And if you add on top of this that all opinions are controlled and manipulated by, in Marx's case, the communists, or for our situation in the United States, the Department of Education or the state, or mass media, if all of this is controlled by another centralized entity, then really the opinions are largely going to be the same. So there's only one party in a democracy. And you can kind of see which party lends itself more to this democratic situation. The party that used to be the only party that pushed this word democracy. And it's almost like a lot of people have given up trying to fight the idea of democracy. You used to see it every once in a while. Hey, we're a republic, not a democracy. But now you you don't hear it at all. Instead, you just hear people referring to democracy just because it's so tiresome to get in that argument, right? You want the argument to move along, and so you're not going to kill it right there in the very beginning because of one word. And so, what's it like to live in a democracy? Well, you go after other people who have different opinions and different subjectivities, right? So, Scott Ritter, who is a former nuclear weapons inspector during the Soviet Union period, he is very outspoken against the wars that we're seeing and the wars past. So his house got raided because of this idea of that he's a foreign agent, right, employed by another government, which is interesting, right? So if you're pro peace, now all of a sudden you're investigated. So if there is only one party, one permitted opinion, one permitted subjectivity, then there's no competition of thought, no competition of power, no competition of agenda. You either fall in line or you're a fascist, you're a racist, you're a sexist, you're a transphobe, whatever. And so if you don't toe the party line, if you don't say what everyone else is saying, what you're supposed to say, what is the acceptable and permitted opinion of the state, then everything else is misinformation or hate speech. So basically the people in power, if they don't like it, then it's misinformation. If they don't agree with it, then it's hate speech. Okay. So you have that kind of situation, and we're seeing it, right? We see that and unfolding before our eyes, and it doesn't even matter what the words mean any longer. If they say this is bad, then it's bad. It doesn't matter what it actually means or not. And this is the nature. This is the characteristic. This is what democracies look like, right? So it won't be long before you'll see imprisonment, not just harassment or fines, but you'll see imprisonment, banishment, even execution because of the fact that you are stepping out of line, right? So Waltz, the new VP pick for, the Democratic Party, when he was governor, he had a narc line, a phone number that you could call to narc on your neighbors, to tattle on your neighbors, to report on your neighbors. It is said that East Germany, the German Democratic Republic, 1 in every 4 people was an informant for the government. So you couldn't even come home and have a conversation, a private conversation among your family, because you don't know if one of them is going to narc on you, report you to the governmental authorities, and then you'll be kidnapped at night, you'll disappear, you'll be, fined or punished in some way. And so no one could really say what they wanted to say. And Walt seems to really want and strongly desire that kind of democratic situation where you tattle on and report on all of your neighbors so that they get in trouble, and people like him and people who like that idea obviously are people who just sort of enjoy and get some kind of pleasure of seeing other people get in trouble for expressing different opinions. So in a democracy, then the government must control the information, the flow of information, and education. And if you look at the 10 planks of the Communist platform, the Department of Education, public school education, very, very important. Control of the flow of information, yes, very important, right? So, and we see it today, mass media, public school system, universities as well are very, very big cheerleaders for democracy. Now, contrast this democratic situation with the free market. Now, in the free, and I've talked about this before, and I'm sure you already know this, but in a free market, we vote with our buying habits, right? So we go out into the market and the things that we buy, that's our vote. And the more expensive something is, the more votes that we are casting for a certain product, right? Which is the signal for manufacturers to bring the price down on those products so that more people can have it and increase their standard of living. And so the free market is much more efficient and it is much more satisfying to everyone, not just the winning party, but to everyone who goes out in the market and spends their dollars for the things that they want. They don't have to wait 2 years or 4 years or 6 years. They can have it now. And if what they want, it doesn't exist yet or it's not available, that's when innovation then becomes a thing, right? So, hey, wouldn't it be awesome if I had uh, I don't know, seatbelts in my car? Wouldn't it be awesome if, I had a machine that would pick cotton for me? Whatever, you have the opportunity for innovation when you try to do something and you have an idea on how to make things better, but it hasn't been invented yet. You can invent it now, right? And that's what is possible in a free society, not in a democracy. In a democracy, you got to pick cotton this way. In a democracy, you got to, do everything in the way that people who really don't care about your quality of life, you have to do it their way, right? And those people, of course, they are getting fat on all of your suffering. And that's not a system that we really want, right? And so even the people who disagree, who hate the free market, their lives are much better because they have a free market, and that's something that is, so frustrating for people not to see. So obviously, we no longer have a free market here in the United States. We have democracy. And because we have a democracy, we have pretend elections with pretend primaries, with pretend rallies. All of this is fake. It's misinformation, right? And I've said before that, I really believe that if Trump is going to win, it is going to be a huge challenge. It's like trying to climb Mount Everest with various levels, with various disabilities. It's going to be very, very difficult, right? Because they know how to create votes, right? So, I mean, how do you beat that? I don't know. Uh, and at the same time, to ensure and guarantee that as many people stay in the dark as possible, they engage in projectionism, right? So they talk about insurrection when in fact they're the ones that pulled off a coup. They call everyone else a fascist when in fact they're the ones that are fascists. And I made a post. I said on X, you can follow me on X, by the way, Subjective Professor. But weird, right, I think is the new word for fascism, right? So the guy who came up with the word weird, well, that's Waltz, and he freely continues to use the word fascist. And so what I saw when I heard that was weird means fascist. That's what that means. So they throw around that term, and so they can say that's not what I mean by weird, but they never explain it. And so that meaning is, understood by people who use it. They really mean fascist. And so we can go into terminology. I won't do that so much in this episode, but the term that we're wrestling with is the term of democracy, right? The shifting of that definition of that word, the use of it, and how people understand it. So I noticed this with my kids, when I kept pushing them to use a dictionary, they would say, oh no, I'm just going to try to know the meaning by the context. But if the word is being misused, or even if it's properly used, but the context makes you get one impression when really it's talking about something else, then slowly, you grow up thinking that you know what a word means when in fact you have no idea what it means. I mean, even when I was at university and I would use that word and I would ask people what it means, they had no idea. It was a fascinating thing to observe. And so, having clear definitions in order to have a conversation was a very important aspect of the method that I taught all my classes. So people, and this phenomena happens everywhere. It even happens particularly in churches, which is why churches are struggling, Christian churches, and I'm sure in other religions as well, why Christian churches struggle as much as they do with certain concepts. Now, the communists have an advantage because they are united, mostly because they don't think, right? They just follow orders, right? Everyone starts saying weird at the same time. There are no free thinkers there. There are no critical thinkers there. They just follow their programming. Oh, this is what's good. Okay, tell me what's good. Okay, that's good. Okay. And so they get to absolve themselves of all liability, of responsibility. And this is why we have to continue to focus on freedom. Before we get into those arguments over terminology, we have to focus on freedom, freedom with responsibility. That's what I always tried to educate. That's what I always tried to teach. It didn't always get through, but people who got it, who understood, they were able to run with that idea. And so they became extremely, much more uh, bold with their creativity, shall I say. Now, personally, for me, I do have a line in the sand. I told my family the other night what that line is, that if things get really bad, then I'll, do more than just simply try to educate and teach, in the classroom or on a podcast, but I will have to become more active socially and perhaps politically. But in the meantime, right, that's something that we have to realize is that they are capitalizing on the ignorance of society, the mass ignorance and cluelessness that they have created. So they use this word democracy, which has become some kind of, benevolent concept of the height of morality, when in fact it is the height of evil. Well, I'll leave it there and I will talk to you hopefully with a much more upbeat topic tomorrow. Take care.